they function within an org as an employee. Like, you clock in, you clock out. I get my paycheck, I leave. An owner goes, if I clock in and clock out like that, the org may not be around in a year.
Welcome back to the Digital Ministry Podcast. I'm your host, Nick, and I am back with our good friend, Jay Kranda. Jay, thanks for doing this again.
Yeah, I'm excited to continue the conversation, jumping on, and I know we got some fun topics.
It's good to be back in the studio. I've been getting some text messages from some close mutual friends of ours, and they're like, hey, let's get some more episodes. Like, what's going on, you know? And I've been traveling so much. I tried to record several times from like hotel rooms and stuff. It always just sounds awful, you know, because like I've gotten kind of spoiled with this setup that we have here. So good to be back in the studio with you. Thanks for joining. We were chatting a little bit a few minutes ago, and I want to talk about this publicly because I think that it's a challenge that a lot of these ministry teams have. I know that the team at MII wrestles with this like on a continual basis. And I think one of the things I want to do is kind of expose this issue as like, this is a continual process that's always going to be present. And so really how you set up kind of organizational structure and clarity and make your goals clear really helps determine like how you address this problem. So what problem are we talking about? We are talking about the tension that exists between outreach efforts and follow-up efforts. And you know, most of the ministry teams and leaders that are, you know, listening to this podcast are going to recognize this as a challenge probably within their own organizations. And it's this idea that we are reaching people online. We are creating leads, if you'll allow me to use, you know, like some, I don't know, businessy terms in a ministry context, but like we're reaching people with gospel message, biblical message, whatever the case may be. And then when they enter into a follow-up process, if we're not seeing the type of outcomes that we expected, things like professions of faith or engagement in Christian community or whatever, you know, whatever outcomes you're trying to drive toward, who's responsible for that? So that's kind of the setup here. And just to continue to monologue for a bit longer, I'm going to give a little backstory that I think is a business case example of this. So in my last company, I was the chief marketing officer for this software company, and business development reported to me. So we were selling enterprise software solutions to customers like Salesforce and Google and Microsoft, like big accounts. And the business development team was responsible for kind of prospecting, finding leads, understanding who's interested, who's in market, which, you know, CTOs or, you know, sales directors or whatever were interested in buying our software. And then they would bring in those leads through with the marketing team. And then we would deliver those to account executives that then were responsible for kind of nurturing that account and that client and closing the lead. And the tension was always like marketing has their KPIs and their goals. You have to deliver, you know, X number of leads per month or whatever it is. And then the sales team has to close, you know, to hit a certain revenue goal. And if the sales team is missing, they blamed marketing. If the marketing team was hitting their numbers, but the sales team was missing, they're not closing the leads that we're giving them. Sales would say, these leads are bad. You know, you're reaching the wrong people. If you give me something good to work with, then I can do my job. It's a little less kind of tenuous, I think, in a ministry context, but that same tension still exists. And so with that as a setup, Jay, I want you to describe some of the work that you've been doing at MII recently with our Training for Trainers program, because you're kind of sitting right in the middle of this and you've got perspective on both sides. So I'd love to just kind of maybe start with hearing your perspective on what you've seen over the last 6 weeks with MII as you've kind of increased your role and you really started to work with both these outreach teams and the follow-up teams, but then also kind of extending that work to train partner organizations that are working with MII on, you know, on one side of this house or the other.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely is a question that I have been wrestling through for sure recently. Yeah, our trainer program at MII kind of is this amazing program that helps those that may not be able to jump into like a larger kind of partnership with MII, but really provide some coaching for ministries on like kind of more of a sponsor type of scenario where maybe they can't hire MII to do something or attend one of our trainings, but we come alongside and go, hey, we can coach you in some of these key areas and kind of move you forward. So what's very different about the trainer program is we don't do the work. We just coach you to do the work. And the key is that it's kind of like leading a horse to water versus bringing the water to the horse. We really want to teach you the kind of the mechanisms. And so ideally, what happens is that we coach you, we train you, you do it, you get stuck, we help you get unstuck, and eventually you kind of learn how to do this on your own. And so it's been fun to watch, and MI has, these hubs around the world, and there's just some amazing work being done. Now, the struggle is that I've noticed is that there's this mentality that can kind of happen. And this is just, I think it's not a ministry thing. I think it's just a human thing that when I'll also reflect that some other roles that I play, I've noticed this too, even in my church role, where what happens is, sometimes people get hired to do something and they think their job is just to do their job description they were hired on.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is time goes by, the org changes, things change. And I've noticed that there's this like huge shift between like an employee and an owner mentality. And this is something we've been talking a lot at my church, and I see a lot because something I've realized about myself is because of just how I'm wired, probably, and Nick, you're wired the same way, is that when I look at my job, no matter what I'm doing, I do not think of it as this is what I'm told to do. I think of it, no, like here's what the org needs to do.
Right.
And so sometimes when somebody tells me something and it goes against our org goals, I ask the follow-up question, wait, that doesn't make sense. Like, why don't we do it this way? And that's where like sometimes people they function within an org as an employee. Like you clock in, you clock out. I get my paycheck, I leave. An owner goes, if I clock in and clock out like that, the org may not be around in a year. Like we may go
Right.
bankrupt.
Yeah.
And you can't just clock in and clock out. Like we were talking before this, like I was off yesterday and I was taking a day with my family at an amusement park, and I got a couple texts, and an employee would go, no, I'm out. Like I'm not answering.
Right.
But as more of a, owner mentality, I'm like, no, my job is to keep the momentum of the org moving forward. Like I got to at least respond.
Right.
And I mean, it's not like it derailed me. It just took 5 minutes.
Sure.
And I could just, I'm in line somewhere and I just move it forward. And so what I've noticed is as you think about that sales side and kind of the follow-up side, it's thinking through like it is a little bit of both ends of the spectrum need to be working together. But I think what happens sometimes is people in roles need to be reminded that the goal isn't just to get a bunch of leads. And the goal isn't to just, drive anything through follow-up. The goal is for it to be high quality. And so they need to be talking to each other. And so, and this is why there's this tension between having like, hey, you need to get 100 leads and you need to have, let's say 50 follow-ups, and you can lean one way or the other. And this is where some people think it's more of a job description than like an owner mentality. That's something I've like, you need to rise above like what you see in front of you, but that's hard. It's hard when there's a lot of changes in the org. It's hard when you were never told that. I think it takes a lot of self-awareness and it's difficult, but that's one area that I kind of feel is that owner mentality is really important. And sometimes that's just something I don't know if you can teach. Like I try to reverse engineer why I see things that way sometimes, and I don't see it all the way. But even you, Nick, you'll text me something and I go, oh, I didn't even think of it that way, and it's sometimes you just need to be open to change on. And but I joke a lot, like we've gone through a lot of change at my church, and one of the things that I would say to my team a lot is like understand your job description is kind of understand that's your job, but understand you got to remember the larger org goals, and that's actually our larger role. And so like be open to adjust if it aligns with where we're going. But I think that's just that owner mentality is something that I've kind of noticed is really important.
So you said something, you said you don't know if you can teach that. I want to just double click on that a little bit because I think it can be taught, but is this kind of inherent to somebody's, work ethic and
Mhm.
mentality, or is it might be a case of like if you cast the vision of what you're trying to build, people have a choice, to get on board or not. And I think that speaks to the importance of like communicating internally, like I hear you describing. This is what we're trying to do. We have to think about the larger organizational goals. And like that's what we're here for, is to help deliver those goals. Is that how do you do that in your church? Are you like I'm sure you have regular staff meetings. Is that a topic of conversation?
Yeah, I mean, definitely that nature nurture conversation I think is key to a lot of these, especially leadership type of moments. It's funny, I was just talking to somebody about this, one of my like my you know one of my leaders, and I've naively had a lot of success in coaching people, and I think I'm just young enough where I don't know if I've had a lot of like terrible coaching experiences.
Hmm.
So like I may be a little bit too confident in my ability at this stage. And so I say that like really like honestly, like I don't know, like I think so. Like we were talking about a couple people, and I was like, I just give them time, and I think we can nurture them to this goal.
Yeah.
Like I think we can coach them towards this goal. But I do think it's something that I think people have to be very you have to be humble enough to know to take the feedback. And I think taking feedback is there's that book I think it's Kim Scott, Radical Candor. Um
Yeah. Okay.
you've read this book?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really good book. But like I think about it like there's been plenty of times that I've been slapped on the wrist, like metaphorically, I've been slapped on the wrist in an org. And my first gut response is to blame, like, well, you did this, and blah blah blah. And so usually 9 times out of 10, when I take a deep breath and kind of gathered myself and kind of get my like adolescent response out of the way, I realize that like, oh, I get it. Like like, I understand why they did that. I may not agree with how they did it, but, like, I understand, especially as an owner, like, mentality. Like, I
Right.
can I can understand it, and I think some people if I see somebody's very open to coaching, I get really excited that I can nurture them more towards that goal, and I think and if they're more closed off to feedback, meaning no, I just know what's best, and they blame it on a bunch of people. And sometimes you need to point out wrongs in an org. Like you need to say like this is wrong. Like there are things that I go, that's wrong how you did it. But still I understand why you did it. Just next time you do this, do it this way. Like and I would receive it a lot different. But I think feedback, if you're not open to feedback, I think it's going to be really hard. And that's where I might be like you're more closed off to potential. That would be my thought. Do you agree with that? Like or are you kind of
No, I think that's true. I was just looking up a note here because I couldn't remember the verse, but Proverbs 29:18 says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish."
mm,
And I think what we're talking about is kind of vision casting within an organization. Uh, I heard a podcast with Dave Ramsey was being interviewed the other day. For those that may not know, Dave Ramsey's like this, popular radio voice in the US around like personal finances and outspoken Christian, but he's kind of a no nonsense guy. You've probably listened to his radio show or podcast or something, and he'll be like, "Stop being an idiot," like he's very direct. So like that whole radical candor thing, if your organization is not set up, you can't as a leader come in and like, okay, we're going to implement radical candor, and I'm just going to blast all of you
yeah.
people, like. But what Ramsey's done is he's built a really clear vision over the years of building this organization. They've got like 1,100 people that work for him now, and he was talking about how they hired a COO, and I mean, for a long time, like I think he said 2 years, this guy would just attend these executive team meetings. And one of his habits was every time they kind of reached a decision or finished a conversation, he'd say, hold on, before everybody leaves. Like, here's what I think I heard. Here's how we arrived at this decision with, and he's testing that against the team. Like, does that sound right? And they're like, yeah. So he would gather these notes. And after about 2 years, he came back to Dave and he says, here's all of the kind of decision criteria that we've been using to kind of set the course of this organization. Because I think these are really like the core values of the company. And core values are so often like misunderstood. I think it's not like a poster on the wall. It's like, oh, we value honesty and transparency, and our values are, integrity. And Enron had integrity as one of their core values. It's like
Yeah.
the famous example,
Yeah.
it's like one of the biggest frauds in financial history with Enron. They clearly, they had a poster somewhere or probably multiple locations that said integrity as a core value. Nobody was operating that way. But what they do at Ramsey Studios is they will say, okay, here's one of our values, and I'm going to talk about that today. And this is why this is a value, and this is how we behave. And I really liked how Dave put it. He was like, this is we. If you're not we, then you don't belong here. And like making it really clear that people have a choice to make. You don't have to have this job. You can go work someplace else. But if you work here, this is how we're going to behave. And it kind of ingrains that owner mentality. So to your question, like, can it be taught or is it just inherent? I don't know, but you can filter for that, certainly just by communicating. This is how we're going to do things. Like, this is why we're doing this. What I'm hearing you say is, this is why we're doing this. This is what we're trying to accomplish. I want you to think about these things, in your day to day. And then, sometimes you need time, like you said, but sometimes people are like, they're not into it. And it's like, if
Yeah.
you're not into it, then maybe you should go find a different team, which is really, you know, tough, I think, for some people to hear and also for some leaders to deliver.
Well, and I think it comes down to ultimately you gotta set the tone of the culture, and that starts with the top down.
Yeah, that's true.
Being open to that feedback, because like I know a very extreme business example of this is what they do at Bridgewater Capital, where Ray Dalio is at.
Yeah.
And they do like real-time mechanisms around, do you agree with a thought? So literally you'll be in a board meeting and you'll
You're on
mark
the
like
spot.
on the spot, and they have this whole top down thing about how they do this, and they literally like, I disagree with that thought, and they'll do that even to Ray and the leader. So like imagine you're in a board meeting with your boss and he says a thought, and like 10 people in the room hit a button and they say 4, I disagree, 1 out of 10. And but what they do, what's interesting about that, and this is very to the extreme, and I don't think this is a model where people should do this, but it's it's a little bit more of a metocracy like type of like thing, where like you're not just weight off of like your position, it's off of what you actually are saying. And so what happens is, people graduate to a certain level, and then people just do what that person at that level says. And ideally, if you have an org that is, I think, healthy, is that it's what's the best idea. And when somebody below you says something that disagrees with your thought, it's not just the person above that wins, it's what's the best idea. And I think creating that culture is hard because um it's I think it's natural to wait on the top.
Yeah. Right.
And that's why I think if you as a leader, there's another concept of pushing the decision making deeper into the org. If everybody at the top of the org is making the decisions, you start really limiting how many decisions you can make. But if you empower people under you to make, because here's the deal, like if you had a church or an org, like we're having this conversation within MII where we have people creating digital campaigns, like ad experts doing things. Then we have people in follow up, thousands, tens of thousands of messages. And here's the problem. The person creating the ads is an expert at optimizing ads across all these platforms and experiences and formats. But that person is not in the tens of thousands of messages that are happening every week.
Right.
And so what you need is the ad expert to go, what are the quality of the messages you're getting, especially for us, where you're getting into multi languages. So
Right.
this person creating the ads, it can't speak all the languages that the ad's going into, but the follow-up team is. And so you have, tens of, people and so you need feedback. You need the follow-up team. And so like,
Yeah.
for example, like this is where, like we're coming in and going, hey, like we need this cross partnership, and think of it like, hey, your goal isn't just to get all these follow-up. The goal is quality. And I need you to, if you see like you have 100 messages and you see a theme in the follow-ups that are leading to more people coming to Jesus, can you escalate that feedback to the ad expert so that maybe the next ad we run is within that theme? So like, and because there's a lot of ways to drive engagement on ads, but it doesn't mean the quality. And so that's where the complexity gets. And this is why I think if you top down, you're taking a lot of feedback, you're being honest when you make mistakes, that humanizes people. And then you encourage and coach that high feedback. And so this is why I am a believer that most of it can be coached. Now there might be a level of coaching, and so maybe they're not going to be in your role, but maybe they could be in a higher role. And so I think that's how I kind of
Yeah.
see this playing out.
No, I think that's an excellent description of this tension that we started with. So I was on a call yesterday with Ben Boykin, the new COO at MII, and he was asking a very simple question that's difficult to answer, like who's responsible? So if a campaign is not performing, who's responsible for that? And I'm going to tell you how I responded.
I'm curious what you said. Yeah.
So a principle that I think is at play here is when you have multiple people responsible, because MI is kind of a complex organization. So it's like, well, we've got this international director, and then you've got regional directors, and then the outreach team running the ads and the follow-up team both report to that person. And so it's kind of like this shared responsibility. And I was like, that doesn't work. You can't have shared responsibility. There has to be like a point person to go to, at least as a starting point. So what you're talking about is kind of this collaborative effort that happens inside an organization. And I think that's absolutely true and correct. That's right and good. But who is responsible for like surfacing that? And what I said was, I think it has to be the follow-up team. I think, we don't really understand who we're reaching until they move from anonymity to being known. And that knowing happens when somebody provides some type of personal identifiable information. So like, my name's Nick and I have this question. At that point, now I understand, okay, what's the outcome of all of this ad flow? And so I think I was kind of putting forward this idea that I think the follow-up team is responsible, or the person answering that. So like, to your example of you got 100 messages and you're seeing this theme, it's the responsibility of the follow-up team to elevate that and at least say, I've got a question here. Like, either like we're targeting the wrong persona, the ad messaging might be off, or there's a little bit of self-reflection too. Like, am I following the right process that we've, and this is where your coaching, I think, is really playing a big role. It's like, are we following the right process to nurture those conversations to the point that we can, understand, is this person like truly kind of interested in continuing forward, in this discipleship process or not? But once that check is done, I think it's the responsibility of the follow-up team to surface that and say, we need to look into this and really start to facilitate and initiate that conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I kind of simply would think of it as whoever's the closest to whoever's in the highest role of leadership, but still closest to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Like you want somebody who actually can kind of vet what's happening at the front lines. So
Right.
so one of the tensions with like an ad team, especially with like an org like MI, you have people running ads in a decentralized way, like literally on the other side of the world.
Yes.
And they don't actually know what's happening on the other end. They can look at clicks and responses, but there's a lot of things that happen in ads to
There's a
drive a
lot
lot of
of
clicks.
information that gets
Yeah.
buried.
So yeah, you can have 100 messages, but they're all junk replies. And
Right.
so we know that that's the hard work of fine tuning a campaign. And that's what MI is really good at. But you need somebody on the front end who can actually tell you, no, like we need to change it. And so like, I think of it like, kind of going back to the sales thing, like you have a general manager of a hotel who is responsible for what's happening at that hotel. You know, how many rooms are being booked, what's going on, and they're partnering with a sales team and they're giving feedback. And I think that makes sense. I could see that being the way that you gave that feedback. That would make a lot of sense, because I will say, like, you know, that's definitely like, even as we've kind of started to kind of rev up some things at MII, like I'll send emails to various team members and I'll just, sometimes I will just connect the salesperson and the follow-up team. And I'll just like, hey, have you guys talked?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like, because, you know, because honestly, I've been in both roles and I know why it's hard. Like, I think too, you got to understand, like, yeah, this is hard, but understand, like, hey, ad person, your job isn't just to run the ad. Hey, follow up person, your job isn't just to reply. It's like, we got to work together. I will say I do this a lot with my kind of my role as a church. I'm always reminded that somebody donated, like tithed, to make my role possible. And so like that stewardship thing is always on my mind of like, am I being a good steward? Like I still like I kind of jokingly say this to people all the time. Like I still think it's wild that I get to work at a church and that's my job. Like it doesn't even make sense. Like if I think about it, like I live in a crazy time in church history, that this is my opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing when we get to do ministry work and it aligns with, you know, providing for
Yeah.
our families. Like, and so like I think this is the ownership thing. Like there are things that I can do with my money that would be crazy and fun, but I also at the end of the day have a responsibility for my wife and my 3 kids. And so I act as an owner with my budget, like with our resources. And I think this is why it's different. If you're an employee, you just spend, and you don't care if the company goes under. But as somebody, ideally channeling my inner Dave Ramsey, you know, you act your wage, and it's you got to be strategic. And that's why I think this cross partnership, having that owner mentality, then you can ask better questions and you can create a better culture for your org, which ultimately accomplishes the vision or the objectives of what you're trying to do.
Act your wage. I love that.
Yeah, it's my
Um,
favorite. It's my favorite Dave I almost said Whamsy.
yeah.
Like my brain was.
You did say
I
whimsy.
did.
So,
Leave that in.
yeah,
Leave that
so
in.
for sure. We don't edit this. This is like unvarnished. And this is a little bit of an unfair advantage. In this case, you know, on this conversation, Ben agreed with me. He's like, "Oh, that makes sense." You know, because he's trying to kind of figure out how everything's working. But like for me to follow up the next day and publish a podcast with you, like pushing my idea forward.
You're pushing. Well, it would have been great if you would have told me something live on the pod, like, Jay, you're no longer in charge. You know what I mean, or something like that. And you're just getting my real time response. You know.
Well, I do want to say your work has had a tremendous impact. So I was just looking at some of the numbers. I don't know if you saw this, but we just finished the first quarter of the year, and MII reached more people, saw more professions of faith and like meaningful outcomes than any other quarter in its 10-year history.
Oh wow.
And so I think what we're talking about is actually delivering some really good results for the organization. And so for other people listening to this, I would just encourage them to get that feedback loop happening between your follow-up team and your outreach team. They've got to be talking, they got to be sharing information. And really, as a leader, I think your opportunity is to diffuse this tension, like whose fault is it? Because if there's a win,
Yep.
we're all going to win together. You know what I mean? So there is responsibility that exists. Like whose responsibility is it to surface some of these issues? I think you have to have a point to go to for that. But it's less about arguing back and forth, and it's more about like this ownership mentality. Okay, collectively, what is the mission? Like, what are we trying to do? And then just take an honest look, like, are we accomplishing that? We can wrap this up here, but there's 2 books that come to mind that I've read recently. Actually, when I was in that other organization, I was reading like a book a month and just trying to like boil that down and share learnings with my team. And over the few years that I was the CEO there, I mean, every single month I was like consuming something else and trying to push that out to our team. But there's a book called Team of Teams, which comes out of, I can't remember the author offhand here, but like Team of Teams is about these military operations in the U.S. military, and they realized through some of these conflicts in the Middle East where there's like really guerrilla tactics happening on the ground, that centralized command didn't have the information they needed to make decisions fast enough, and so they pushed the decision making down in the organization. It's like at the team level, you've got responsibility, ownership mentality, and the ability and expectation to be making decisions and then reporting back up like what's happening. The other one is another military example called Turn the Ship Around. And that's a great book. It's about this submarine captain who took on the worst performing sub in the whole organization. They kind of rank performance based on crew longevity, different, training exercises, things like this. He took on the worst one, and a few short years turned it around to be the best performing sub in the entire, organization. And it was by helping people understand, like, you're not just clocking in, like you have a role to play in the large organization, take some ownership mentality. And that book in particular is really great for what you're talking about. I would encourage people to read it because he had to go kind of mine for these opportunities. He created situations where people had to make a decision and he wasn't going to make it. And as a leader, I think leaders are often comfortable in their positions. Like, I'm the decider, so I'll make a decision. But like, if you want that to push that decision making down, you have to hold off. You can't do that. You have to define. And what he did was he defined, he had two jobs. Where are we going? And I think the other one had to do with attacking. Like, he gets to like make the call if they fire a torpedo or something like that. But those are his only two decisions. Everything else is somebody else's responsibility. And he would not engage in decision making if it fell outside of those two things. And so I've thought about that a lot, and I've tried to decide, okay, like, what are the one or two things that I'm going to maintain responsibility for? And then everybody else is responsible, for everything else. Like, somebody in my organization owns everything else. So, Jay, really good insights. And just again, I'll say you're doing great work. I mean, thank you for infusing some of this into the MII team, but also sharing that with other organizations. And so I'll plug a little bit here for MII. Like, if you are kind of engaged in digital ministry and you're looking for some help, reach out. MII is always happy to engage in those conversations, put you in touch with somebody like Jay, who can initially just take a look at what you're doing and provide some insight. But maybe there's an opportunity to go a bit further and really drive performance across your digital ministry outreach efforts. So, Jay, thanks for your thoughts. Always good, and appreciate your insight.
No, thank you. And I just added 2 of those books to my Amazon cart. So thanks for that too.
Well, read them and let me know what you think.
I will.